All right, guys, good morning. Real quick, right before we go into that test, let's go ahead and take a look at those communication issues, right? AV blocks. These are not that difficult as they seem to be sometimes. So let's just go ahead and take a look. First off, let's just say that we're going to have communication problems in here, right? Hence the picture that you're seeing right now in your screen. I thought it was pretty fun. So anyways, let's go ahead and continue. And I call it communication problems because let's just go ahead and remember, we have a heart, 4 chambers, and in here you have your SA node, which is the intrinsic pacemaker of the heart, the one that sets the pace. In other words, just like in a marriage, this is a she, right? She's the one that sets the pace, isn't it, right? So from here, the conduction goes down to the AV node, which is in charge of delaying this current just a tiny bit. So these two guys cannot beat at the same time, right? This one beats, she beats, then he beats. She tells him what to do, right? She beats, he beats, she beats, he beats. And the only way to achieve that is that slowing of conduction, right? Between the SA node and the AV node. All right, so in other words, this current between these two guys, this is communication. If anything happens here during this time of communication, then we're going to have a problem, or what we know as a AV block, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and move on. Our first degree AV block. First degree AV block is much like a sinus rhythm, like a normal sinus rhythm, but the only difference is that the PR is going to be greater than 20 seconds, right? And let's just remember, PR is that time between the time the SA node fires to the time the AV node receives, right? It's like, honey, yes, dear. Honey, yes, dear, right? So in this case, what's going to happen is that we have a slightly longer response time. Honey, yes, dear, right? So instead of being a normal sinus rhythm with this fast of a response, this one's going to be a bit longer, right? That's it. That's all you have to do about a first degree block. It's pretty much the same thing as a normal sinus rhythm, but the PR is longer than the normal. Simple as that. All right, moving on. Let's take a look at second degree. Now, second degree further subdivides into 2 types. Second degree type 1, right? And in second degree type 1, the important thing here is that the PR elongates, but it elongates uniformly, right? Until you have a drop. Let's see what that means. Let's take a look at it in the background of that marriage that we were talking about some minutes ago. In this case, you're going to have her say, honey, and then immediately after, he's going to answer, yes, dear. But then in here, you're going to say, honey, yes, dear. Honey, yes, dear. Honey. Oh man, I'm tired of this woman calling me left and right. I'm not going to answer this time around. And then she gets really mad and she goes, honey. Okay, yes, dear. Right? And it goes back to normal. Right? The thing here, what I want you to know is that she calls, he responds immediately, then she calls, and then he takes a little bit longer to respond. She's annoying him. Then she calls again, and then he's really annoyed, so he takes a longer time to answer, and longer and longer and longer and longer, until there is a point where she calls and he decides not to answer. And then she calls really angry, and then immediately he responds back again, and the cycle begins again, right? Just kind of, hopefully that makes sense that way. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at second degree AV block type 2. Okay, in type 2, things are a little different. In type 2, the PR is going to be constant, but you're going to have the presence of more P waves than QRX complexes, right? So basically the difference between one and the other, is that in here, you're going to have a P8 that elongates uniformly, whereas in second degree type 2, you're going to have a constant PR, okay? So, honey, just deer, honey, just deer, honey, just deer, honey, no deer. Simple as that, right? So in other words, you're going to have an extra P because you're going to drop that QRS, right? And in a third degree AB block, this guy is just so absolutely fed up and she cannot take this guy anymore that they're just not talking to each other at all, right? Then again, let's remember that that communication occurs from here to here, right? But for that communication to happen, you need to have a wire in between the two of them. In a third degree block, this communication is completely broken, right? In third degree block, they're not talking to each other. So you are going to have irregular PR intervals because they're just not communicating. They talk every so often because they have to, just like a divorce, right? They talk when they have to, when they're mandated to, but other than that, they don't want to talk to each other. So she calls, he answers, but then she calls and then he takes a little bit longer to answer. Yeah, I was busy with my new girlfriend. I didn't want to answer you at that time. And here's the same thing. I was working. I'm not in the mood for you. Here, he didn't answer at all. Here, he answered immediately for whatever reason, and so on and so forth, right? So as you can see, in a third degree AB block, the PR is going to vary a lot, right? It's going to be different every time, different from the other two, right? So let's go ahead and revisit, let's go ahead and revisit these one more time. Okay, in a first degree AB block, you're going to have a PR that is constant. However, it's going to be longer than 0.2 seconds or 20 seconds, which is the normal for the PR interval, right? So that means that between the SA no and the AB no, there is a little delay, right? Then in a second degree type 1, the PR elongates uniformly. She calls and he answers, but then she calls and he takes a little bit longer to answer, and then she calls and he takes a little bit longer to answer, and then she calls and he decides that, you know, I'm not going to answer. And then she gets really mad, calls him again, and then he knows better than to delay the answer, so he answers immediately, and so it begins the cycle again. Let's go back to second degree AB block type 2. In this case, unlike type 1, your PR is going to be constant, right? But you're going to have more P waves than QRSs. So she calls, he answers, she calls, he answers, she calls, he answers, she calls, I'm not going to answer. And then she calls really mad and he answers immediately, and so it begins again. And then in the third degree, this is a complete divorce. She either calls whenever she wants and he will respond whenever he wants, and there is no communication among the two of them. So you can see you're missing, right? And it's longer, and this one is longer, and they're doing whatever they want because they're not together anymore, right? And hopefully this helps. And if you did find it helpful, go ahead and give it a like or drop a comment, good or bad, and that will help me tailor whatever it is that we're doing here together. All right. Thank you guys very much. And I'll see you in a couple of minutes.